So before I jump on to some key areas that we would want to hear from you, I want an opening remarks from all three of you. I would want to go with Vineet first from a capital and an MSME point of view. So Vineet, your opening remarks, what do you define this budget around?
Well, I think the finance minister summarized it quite well. She said this is aspiration to potential. So I think in some sense, while I was a little worried because I did not see the fund of funds mentioned, but it is there in the fine print. So there's 10,000 crore for the fund of funds and SMEs, another 10,000 crore for the SME fund, and then 2,000 crore to a top up of an SRI. But I think the more interesting thing was the way they have actually gone around talking about technology, including artificial intelligence, into both improving the efficiency of things that, and specifically under the ease of doing business, and many other things, 40%, 14% increase in the defense budget, which again will have a cascading effect in the startup ecosystem, given the focus of the local defense. Again, another few things that I noticed, which was basically coming up with a 30,000 rupee, pretty much a card for street vendors, which would be a big potential for fintech enterprises. So there are many avenues for entrepreneurs to play around with within the layout of the budget. Of course, the big numbers in terms of FFS, SRI, the 10,000 crore SME fund for growth stage SME. It will be interesting whether it is equity or a debt fund. I thought it was equity, but I'll have to actually figure out what exactly it is. So overall, from aspiration to potential, it seems they are walking the talk, and very, very interesting from that perspective. May have its own negatives for the stock markets, but I'm not so concerned about the immediate impact.
But any misses according to you at an early stage that we are just seeing something that you were expecting which didn't really come about?
So, of course, there was actually a demand of debt parity. There was also a demand for tax parity between unlisted and listed. Well, some of it is actually achieved, but there are some other areas, the time frame, the 3-year time frame versus 1-year time frame. I think those things have not been taken into account. To me, the quantum of capital and the opening the avenues for entrepreneurs to play a broader role is very important. Also, I think things that the finance minister talked about from an agriculture perspective, very interesting, very specific identification of products, agar tree from Northeast, coconut, India is the largest producer, re-emphasizing it and then making sure that coconut, and then in the hilly areas, walnut, pine nut, and almond. So some very interesting things that were picked up and has been supported. So overall, from an entrepreneur perspective, I would say a budget that aligns with what the government has been talking about for the last 10 years and moving forward. So.
Excellent. I'll come back to you, Vineet, but I want to go to Aarti now and take her views on personal finance and something which matters most and is the headline for most of the budgets. So, Aarti, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Sachin. I think from an individual perspective, the best news is that there is no change in the tax rates. At least that's not what the finance minister alluded to. Everyone was getting a little jittery with all the budget allocations and all, saying, where is all this going to come from? And today, if we see the total tax collections, the non-corporate side of it, is about 50%. And given that kind of a thing, people were getting worried. But thanks, there was no change in the tax rates, which the finance minister alluded to. Of course, we have to look at the fine print, but at least that's prima facie what it seems. I think what the finance minister has done is very interesting. She has kind of looked at the niggling problems, the issues which are there at the ground level, and we'll talk about it a bit further in the conversation that we have. But smaller things which will ease the worries for the from compliance perspective. for the taxpayer. A major worry, specifically in the last couple of years, was in respect of foreign asset reporting. And that was creating a hassle. So it may not even be intentional, it might be just out of oversight, but the taxpayer was saddled with a 10 lakh penalty. So, to a certain extent, there is a little bit of relief granted out there. There is also a scheme which has been announced saying that if you've missed, here is your chance to disclose that. All this is, I think, very, very positive in this time where you are, inviting the taxpayers to upfront declare rather than, going the other way. So I think from that perspective, while there are no major announcements, people did expect saying a deduction for loans and increase in the slab rates and all. Even if that was not there, I think this is also quite good, right? So from my perspective, yes, compliance made easier.
Great. So we'll come to Siddharth. Siddharth, from a corporate and international tax, what do you think are the hits and misses in this budget? And I'll come back to you, Aarti. I have some follow-up questions on that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sachin. I think the theme continues similarly in corporate and international tax as well, as mentioned by Aarti. No major tweaks as such. We had a lot of changes last time around with buyback tax related change. There's some change on that again, which has come this time, which is a positive change largely for investors, where the rate of tax on amounts received from buyback proceeds will drop from currently what is deemed to be a dividend back to capital gains tax. So that is one good change that has come through. But other than that, a lot of changes are predominantly for ease of doing business, rationalization of provisions. Like for example, one of the important thing was decriminalization of various offenses under the Income Tax Act. So some of that is coming through. We'll see the fine print, how much of it, but a lot of the prosecution and penalty is getting kind of diluted down, and which is really good from a business environment standpoint. So overall, I think it's more on the side of ease of doing business rather than any major changes to rates, etc., barring the one that I spoke about for buyback tax. And then there are some hits and misses, of course. One has a wish list for MSMEs and startups particularly, but maybe I'll talk about that when we go around the table next time.
Yeah. No, I want to stay around with you, Siddharth, because what I think was a lot of emphasis was ease of doing business, but also on the globalization. So first time we are seeing a government taking some initiative of acknowledging global expansion, global wealth creation as an opportunity. So give us a sense how it would change for startups and companies wanting to build, especially on the technology side. What kind of incentives this would hold for companies to set up their operations in India? We've seen a lot of drainage, whether it's fintech, whether it's SaaS. A lot of companies were wanting to move out of India. But do you think something would change in that regard for companies to set up and stay in India? From a startup and entrepreneurial.
Good point. Actually, there's a lot of announcements in that direction, where we're trying to make it easier for companies to raise funds from across borders. For example, there's a reference in the finance minister's speech on looking at the FDI policy also afresh. There's a specific reference when you talk of technology, there's a specific reference to easing the transfer pricing safe harbors for IT service companies, and they've brought that threshold really up to 2,000 crores. So if you have various IT services companies which are, let's say, providing cross-border services through their marketing front-end entities abroad, those are basically intercompany transactions which are always under scrutiny for transfer pricing, leaving adequate profits in India, and so on and so forth. So they've brought in now a very good up to 2,000 crore scale. IT companies basically can opt for the safe harbor, which is like a voluntary thing at 15% margin, which you leave in India, 15.5, I believe, and then you will not be kind of audited or scrutinized on that point. So that's a really good one. Last year, they already did the biggest relief, which was by abolishing angel tax. So there's now no more scrutiny on valuations, etc., for startups when they're raising funds from abroad or from resident investors. So I think it's positive continuation of last time's relaxation for startups and export-oriented IT service companies. Maybe they could have done a little bit more, like, for example, ESOP taxation. Maybe they could have deferred the tax event to, the liquidity event, because a lot of that was represented, but that's not come through yet. So, but yeah, largely positive, I would say, even on the IT startups and globalization front.
Yeah, there was a clear mention of data centers and SaaS and those kind of opportunities also, which I think is a
Yes.
very sunrise opportunity. Aarti, you want to talk about from a startups, I mean, a lot of wealth creation which was happening. How does it impact on the personal front? You spoke about, the foreign, asset
Assets disclosure.
relaxation. So could you elaborate on that and how, in a simpler terms, what it entails for, Indian entrepreneurs?
Sure, sure. Basically, what would happen, the over the last couple of years, the taxpayers always have to disclose foreign assets, irrespective of whether they are income generating or not. As Siddharth called out, stock options is a very common thing, right? For people who are working in Indian GCCs, Indian companies who have a foreign holding company, and you could have, stock options issued by the foreign company to the employees of the Indian subsidiary. Now, these options are not actually taxed in India till exercise, right? So, in the minds of employees, probably there is no taxing event and there is no visible, asset that they're holding. They're probably holding options, which is just a piece of paper in their hands. But when you are actually having these shares or these options as well, it is necessary to disclose it as a asset in the foreign assets disclosure schedule. And many times this is being missed by people because there is no income which is generated by on that for quite some time till the vesting period happens. It could also be possible that suppose there is an Indian employee who has gone overseas, he had opened a bank account overseas, and money was deposited, and now after a year he has come back. But the bank account is still there with a very nominal fund. He probably has forgotten about it, right? It doesn't figure in his, financial matters at all because there is no significant asset holding over there. He's forgotten to disclose that. Now all of these smaller things are have to be disclosed because you're holding a bank account overseas or you're holding a brokerage account overseas. All these things have to be disclosed in your foreign assets schedule, but they are being missed. And to that effect, there are these concessions which are provided by the finance minister in respect of saying that, okay, if you have missed reporting any income, please come up and disclose this. There's a special scheme which is going to be announced. So this is your chance to disclose it and to avoid major penalties. If there's some asset to be disclosed, that also can be reflected.
And what
So
what is there an extension of time frame or is it a new introduction?
it's a new introduction. Special scheme is what she has mentioned. In terms of extension of timeline, the people who are filing the ITR 2, okay, specifically, their timeline gets extended from July to August. And people who need to revise their return, they had to revise their return by December, that gets extended to March. Now, this is also very welcome move. You see, what happens is many of the people who are having overseas income, let's say a person who returned to India in somewhere in between the year, he had a foreign income, salary income, which needs to be reported. He doesn't have a clarity about it till he files the overseas tax return. And generally, overseas, most countries follow the calendar year, Jan to December. So their filings happen sometime in Feb, March. That's when they actually have clarity on what is the income
Sure.
and what is
Yeah.
the taxes claimed, right? So if you're putting the deadline as December, you are actually, estimating your taxes and your income overseas. Whereas if it gets extended till March, then you actually have clarity on what is the tax credit you can claim. So these are, as I said, small kind of worries which the taxpayer had, which are now to a major extent kind of relaxed or reduced. Of course, as Siddharth called out, one of the things was in terms of, if I could have extended the taxation of stock options, especially for Indian startups, till the point of liquidity or till the point of IPO. There is a provision in place which extends, but that's very limited to only prescribed or approved startups. So majority of the startups don't actually fall into that category, and which is where there is always a cash crunch, because the employees have to pay tax on exercise where there may not be a liquidity event, so they have to pay money from their pocket, right?
No, it's a welcome thing. So thanks for explaining it, this thing. So reduce litigation and ensuring a more safer play from a global competitiveness. I think it really keeps us, keeps the startup stay in India. So Vineet,
Just
anything
to
on the
add,
MSME? Sorry, go ahead.
sorry,
Siddharth, you want to
just
add
quickly
something?
before I forget that point, because she mentioned the prescribed startups, Aarti, I just want to add on that. This prescribed startup definition itself, we would have liked to have seen some relaxation of the threshold there,
Yes,
because there, once you cross 100 crore, you are not eligible for all these benefits. And I think,
completely agree with you.
yeah, I think that has now, time has come to relook at that threshold, because there are a lot of other benefits attached to that prescribed startup definition. For example, carry forward of the losses in case of change of shareholding, and so on. So I think it's time to look at that definition also, which probably got missed out this time, I would say.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that last time we spoke about was SME definition. I think it's very valid point, Siddharth, that we need to really now redefine the startup space also with the kind of growth we're seeing. Vineet, on the MSME growth fund, one of the valid point that you highlighted, which is still to be discovered, whether it's equity or debt. But from a micro SME, you think this budget is friendly? We've spoken about ease of doing business, but from a growth point of view, give us some sense how the budget sort of what is in offering for MSMEs.
Yeah, so I think uh, if you're talking about street vendors, there is a provision for around 30,000 rupees credit card to be issued, which actually is quite significant. There is something similar on the gig worker as well, I think. And both those things are quite relevant from a from a early stage, from a micro MSMEs, especially the smaller ones. I think those who are on the agri side, there is again a significant provision to help the agriculture micro and small entrepreneurs. Again, the provision there are different provisions. Of course, they have already provided significant equity to SIDBI, Small Industries Development Bank of India, which was pre-budget. I think 10 days before that, the announcement came of 5,000 crores, which again is the right instrument. I mean, SIDBI is the right vehicle to support MSME in addition to the SRI fund and this 10,000 crore MSME fund. Now, whether the MSME or the SME, this 10,000 crore fund, how it is utilized, in what way the transmission happens, would be interesting to note in terms of what impact it delivers on the ground.
Yeah, but it kind of helps on the circular economy as well. So, you're getting the bottom of the pyramid being mobilized. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of schemes already. I think there are a lot of interest-free schemes. CGTMS has
So
already grown quite a bit for SIDBI. So I think it's an extension of what
if I
the company has been doing.
if I recollect clearly, there was also an enhancement of capability through CGTMSE as well in the budget speech. Uh, but I think overall, because there is significant provisions, and I was actually trying to cross-relate the startup fund of fund as well. It was actually the announcement was made this year, and we are expecting the 2.0 to be executed this year. Therefore, it is not part of the budget speech actually. So, from that perspective, this is all in motion in some sense, and from aspiration, which is actually making the announcements, to delivering on the ground is the transition. And I think that transition we have seen, and if most of you would have noticed, last 12 months or 15 or 18 months, from the microfinance to micro, small, medium enterprise, there has been a challenge in terms of collections, which essentially indicates that there has been inability amongst both microfinance borrowers as well as MSMEs to generate the extra to meet the repayment obligations that they have. And that challenge has been addressed over last 6 months. And hopefully there are other instruments that may take place in addition to the budget that may take care of some of the risks that we have been witnessing.
Excellent. Some of the sectors, Vineet, where you saw some opportunities being highlighted Would you want to throw some light on that?
I think right now the hottest sector from all points of view is the artificial intelligence one, which the finance minister very strongly alluded to. So I'm leaving out the data center and all the things that she talked about from the data center perspective, but application of AI for making things, and see, because of the literacy gap and the lack of ability amongst a significant part of our population to read, respond to softwares, etc. AI through agentic AI, robots, conversational AI is doing a human service in reaching out to people that comes from the lower strata. So I think there's going to be a significant change in the manner we engage because of the role of artificial intelligence. And because of that role, artificial intelligence is going to become significantly important from an ethics perspective as well, because the models that you train would be the new decision makers of what is right and wrong. And therefore, it's very important for all of us to keep a very close eye on how this sector evolves, because it's not going to influence the upper echelon or the middle echelon. It's going to massively influence those who come from the base of the pyramid. And that makes this sector very important, both from a global competitiveness perspective, but also the making the pyramid, all kinds of pyramid flat. So I heard Vinod Khosla mention that artificial intelligence brings down the pyramid of intelligence. Today, anybody at any level of IQ can use AI to produce the same quality of document that a very bright person from probably St. Stephen's will, or IIM Ahmedabad will. So I think that capability, how you use it and how that capability is trained to provide support to everyone equally, is going to be very important from everybody's point of view. And I saw that as an opportunity, both for taking the technology down, whether it is agriculture, whether it is labor reforms, in every space, every area, from government outreach itself, it's going to play a pivotal role.
So Ashok's also come in. Thank you, Ashok, for joining.
Thank you, sir.
So, your opening remarks, Ashok, we've been discussing. We've got Aarti, Vineet, and Siddharth here with us. So, a quick introduction from you and your take on the budget.
For me,
That's right, yes.
thank you very much. This is Ashok Mehta from Suchi Semicon. Actually, from this budget, we already expecting for ISM policy 2, because ISM 1 almost near to complete. So in this budget, government really help to these industries, and the progress will be the continue. Government announced ISM 2, and for this year, they provision about 40,000 crores for the semiconductor industries. And this time, last time, they focused on that fab and ATMP and packaging industries. But this time, they focused on that entire ecosystem also, for component, for ATMP, fab, for everyone. So this budget is very good for the semiconductor industries. And definitely we all industry players will get the benefit of this incentive scheme. That is my main focus. And if we develop, then that definitely we create the job, and we contribute to the countries for that financially. Because now we have to develop the skill. If we talk about 3 years back, all that engineers will talk about the software engineers. But now in all the universities, they start that separate section of the semiconductor, and they are getting better salaries than that software engineers. So these industries give their 100% contribution for the development of the countries.
So, Vineet, you want to speak about the capital gap, if we really want to be a China plus one kind of an opportunity on the semiconductor front, and there's been a lot of talk about it, and also has put some focus, but throw some light on the private investment play, whether it's capital, talent, policy. How does it all look to you from the sector?
So I think semiconductor is a focus. I think the geopolitics is bringing focus to certain areas. You heard about the rare earth metals, mining minerals, the 4 states that have been identified to to do the mining, to bring up the rare earth metal, to build the rare earth metal corridor. I think similarly, semiconductor is going to be a pivotal area for our investment for the government and for the reasons that were just stated, because these businesses also have very high margin. They're actually very important for sovereignty, and we are we are far behind US and China. So I think the important thing would be in terms of capital. The problem is the capital. This industry requires significant amount of capital from an e-commerce perspective. Yeah. So I think the mobilization of capital in the current private equity venture capital sector, I just noticed that they have renamed the fund of funds, startup fund of funds 2.0, and it will be a comprehensive document that may address some of the things that Siddharth and Aarti mentioned. May not have come in the budget, but I think once that scheme, which I think is in the final stages, comes through, there may be some significant touches to all the asks we have made from ESOP, to probably not so much as ESOP, but on the size and scale of the startup industry or the 100 crore limits, etc. All these representations have been made. My gut feel is it will come into the execution of the startup fund of fund 2.0. But remember, that's not the 10,000 crore that will actually make a difference. To just set up a cell manufacturing facility, you require complete almost $1.2 billion, which is what a 10,000 crore is. But its ability to leverage domestic capital. So based on what we did last time, 10,000 crores, we were able to leverage, I think, 5 or 6 or 8 times of that. So almost a lakh of crore came into through private equity and venture capital. But with the MSME fund, the SRI fund, the fund of fund 2.0, and my guess is the recycling of the money. Most of us who actually are now in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th year are returning that money to fund of fund 1. The quantum of that capital and the belief that EPFO, PFRDA, etc., would also actually be participating. That's going to open a very large pool of capital that we have not seen, of course, in addition to what insurance companies, LIC and others can do. So slowly the domestic capital is going to be a fairly significant pool of India's capital in its own growth. And as I keep telling people who are in the developing economy, that India has started changing simply because Indians have started investing in India. So not only is the government is investing, all the institutions hopefully will drop the fear they have in the mind of venture capital and private equity and participate. And then we'll be backed by some part of the global capital as well.
No, the whole ecosystem. I think the two things which this government and the budgets have highlighted is essentially on the ease of doing and lesser litigation and putting a lot of focus on growth and also on the ecosystem, I think. So thank you, Vineet. We are just 3 minutes away from our time. So I would encourage everyone. We couldn't have Chetan on the call. If anybody could also speak a bit about the mobility and the EV play, that'll be nice. So closing remarks from all 4 of you before we wrap this quick session. We'll go with you, Aarti, first.
Sure. As you said, it's more a budget of ease of doing, ease of compliance, I would say, from a personal taxation. There are certain things which provide reduced tax rates, right? Specifically, I would say around litigation. Upfront, any tax litigation, upfront you had to pay 20% of the penalty. Now that is being proposed, it is proposed to reduce it to 10%. That's a big relief because at times most of these, litigation arises because of some, what I would say, narrow-mindedness of the taxpayers, tax officers who don't accept a certain position, and the litigation goes on for years. So this is something which is a major relief to people. One point probably which makes real sense from
Very quickly, please.
this.
Sorry, we have a bit short on time, so very quickly, Aarti, please.
Yeah. I was referring to the labor reforms, which is not a part of this budget, but that is something which could create a challenge in the coming months, at least till it settles down. So that's from me.
Great. Thank you, Aarti. Siddharth, very quickly, your closing remarks.
Sure. So all tax changes are positive, largely, except perhaps the STT one, which is for the capital markets a little bit. and ease of doing business focus changes. And from an MSME and startup ecosystem perspective, I don't think there are any focused amendments at this time, but overall positive on the tax, corporate and international tax front.
Thanks, Siddharth. Ashok, any closing remarks from you? Any point that you
Yes,
want?
due to this budget, they allot the 40,000 crores. So definitely it help us to create the ecosystem, and maybe some new players also come in these industries. So if maybe more than 10, 15 players come in this industries, whole ecosystem, all the raw material supplier, all the equipment supplier come to India, set up their office, and we will get the better service from that. So this budget will help us to all the semiconductor industries growth.
Good to hear that. Thank you, Ashok.
Thank
Vineet, we've heard a lot from you. Thank you for sharing the insight. But any further remarks before we close this panel?
I think just one final thing. There was an infrastructure development and guarantee, which will bring private equity to development and infrastructure and remove fear, which I think goes in line with all the good things they have said. So,
Excellent. So overall, very positive remarks, positive feedback from all the panelists. Thank you for joining at a very quick notice. And this was Entrepreneur's very quick panel on budget. We follow up with other stories and would seek your time and inputs further. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.